Experiencing the post-holiday blahs? Need something to get your blood pumping again? Then check out the Dog Days of January, a new Dogman story each day for the rest of the month here on Scary Stories NYC. And it all begins right now. The Walking the Coffin Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've had 2 Dogman experiences in my life, and I'd like to tell you about both in this one email. One of them happened fairly recently, and the other one goes back a few years. Part of the reason I thought your viewers would find this so interesting is that both experiences happened in the same general area not too far from Nacogdoches, Texas. I grew up with a bunch of kids who were totally into the paranormal or supernatural, and it was like all we ever talked about. My first Dogman encounter happened with them, and you might say, because of them. It's probably the more interesting one, but because we were all so into spooky stuff, and because we were younger, I don't think people believe me as much when I tell that whole story. I'll tell it to you anyway, but first I want to go over the more recent incident. These days I work from home for my father's company, and I don't get to hang out with my friends as often as the bunch of us would like. I also have less reason to be outside in general, and so there's less chance of anything strange ever happening to me. I guess that's why I was so unprepared when I had my second Dogman experience this past summer. I've been dating this woman I met through work just before the pandemic hit, and she had been more of an outdoors person when she grew up than she's gotten to be since knowing me. She'd been strongly suggesting to me that we should go camping for some time. Finally, late last summer, I gave in to her wishes and off we went to the Angelina State Forest in our home state of Texas. But we didn't witness the great beast while we were camping. We actually saw the Dogman at dawn as we were driving toward the forest on the highway. Driving north on Route 59 right around Nacogdoches, Texas, we literally had to stop to allow a particularly large Dogman enough space to cross the highway. At that time of the morning, the traffic was light, but even so, we were not the only car that had to slow down for the sake of the massive creature. I saw another car heading south that I'm positive saw the same thing we saw. Here's how it all went down. Most of US Route 59 consists of 2 two-lane highways, one heading north and the other heading south. There's the usual grass partition between the roads, and every so often, there's a paved area in the center so that you can make a U-turn if you realize you're heading in the wrong direction. It was at one of those turning points that we saw a very large, very dark figure walking onto the highway off in the distance to the left. As I mentioned earlier, there was a car driving south heading toward that figure, and that car slowed down to give the big guy plenty of space. After the creature passed over into the central paved U-turn area, that car sped past him, and then past us. As he drove by, I can assure you that that driver had a very strange expression on his face. I had already been slowing down as there was clearly something abnormal about this entire scene. That guy was so large. He was an impossibility. I pulled the car to a complete stop right in the middle of the highway, just sitting there idling, not wanting to get closer than maybe 100 feet or 150 feet from whatever that was. Now, in a lot of stories about large bipedal cryptids, and trust me, by now I've read a lot of those stories, the creature is said to bound across the highway in just a few steps. This one did not do that. Instead, we just sat there and waited as this particular man-thing took its time crossing the road. It even turned and looked at us, and I put the car in reverse at that point, ready to back away like a crazy man, if that thing took one step toward us. At this point, we had our best look at the creature. Although it was already becoming light in the morning, I had the headlights on from driving through the night, and this guy walked into their full glare. So the creature was fairly well illuminated, and I'll tell you what the two of us saw with our own eyes. As big as the biggest brown bear, but having a far more humanoid silhouette, there was a giant, furry, bipedal creature crossing the street in front of us. It was definitely brown, not gray as the one that I had seen years back, which I'll get to later. The scene reminded me, while it was happening, of the Patterson-Gimlin film that alleges to show a Bigfoot. I mean, this was walking left to right, same as the figure in that old movie, and it even turned and glared at us at one point, same as Patty in the movie. It also had the same kind of shaggy brown fur covering all or most of it. Using that as a starting point, I will now explain the ways it did not look like Patty. First of all, no large female chest area. I don't know what words you're allowed to use on your channel, but Patty looked female, and this one looked male. That's not to say I saw what was hanging between the legs of the creature, because I did not, but it had a chest that appeared masculine to me, at least from that side angle. Secondly, Patty was not a thin creature, but this one got so skinny at the belly area that it almost resembled an upright walking greyhound. This is not to say that the creature looked hungry or weak or ill, because it did not. It just looked ripped. Zero body fat, tons of muscle, especially in terms of the torso and the shoulders. Third, this creature was bipedal, but unlike Patty, it did not have thick tree trunk humanoid legs with giant flat feet. This creature walked on its tiptoes like a canine would, but it seemed balanced to walk upright. Most dogs can only do that for short periods before falling, and they have to take tiny little steps to stay up. This creature took long, slow, self-assured steps, just like the most macho dude you're ever gonna run into. It's just that this monster man did it on his tiptoes, walking on what looked like big dog feet, not Bigfoot type feet at all. Fourth, this brown hairy creature was somehow canine, or wolfen, or at least gave the impression of being so. I suppose it might have been parallel evolution, but whatever that was, sure did look like a big old dog. Its head had a long row of monster teeth in it, looking like something out of the primordial past. It basically had no forehead at all, with its flat skull signaling that it possessed a tiny animal brain, and was most likely not on a human intelligence level. When he turned and glared at us, though, I nearly peed my pants right there, even though I was inside my car and over 100 feet away. In that second, I realized how defenseless human beings are against nearly all other animals. That creature walking in front of us was built to kill and to eat. You can take the most hardened criminal out of the deepest pit in the worst prison system, and that guy would have been just as scared of the Dogman as my girlfriend and I were in that moment. Intelligence may count for a lot, but not so much when you find yourself face to snout with a creature such as the one my girlfriend and I witnessed on that night. Finally, in terms of comparing Patty from the Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film to what we saw, I'd say that the Dogman was the far taller of the two. Patty looks to be about 6'2", and even when people go back to the site and measure the landmarks to compare to the film, they always seem to come back to that approximation of the creature's size. Well, the one we saw was too big to have been a human in a costume. Not that that's necessarily what Patty was. The Dogman we saw crossing US Route 59 at dawn on that morning was so tall, you couldn't have even gotten a bear to cosplay as that. This was something too tall to exist, really. It was taller than a basketball player for certain. I mean, honestly, I think I was seeing something 10 to 12 feet tall. I just laughed as I typed that. It seems like something I dreamed. But my girlfriend saw it too. so I'm gonna have to insist that it sure seemed real to us. As we drove away, the two of us talked excitedly about what just happened. I had heard John Lennon of the Beatles talk about how excited he was to get to introduce his wife to his musical hero Chuck Berry. Well, that's kind of how I felt getting to show the Dogman to my girlfriend. One of the main reasons I'm with her was that when I told her about the Dogman experience I had when I was younger, she didn't think I was crazy or break up with me. She told me she thought that maybe she might have once seen a UFO, but she wasn't sure. I know she said she believed me about my sighting, but it's hard to fully believe in something you haven't seen for yourself. So I was basically ecstatic that she had seen the animal this time, same as I saw it, and we both knew the experience had been very real. We both talked about how this was going to be the craziest camping trip ever if this was the way it started. However, the rest of the trip was incredibly normal, with nothing even slightly out of the ordinary happening for the rest of our time out in those woods. Okay, now we need to travel back in time to when I was still a teenager in high school. I was a different person back then, a lot less responsible than now, but probably a lot more adventurous. My friends and I were all bonkers, insane, but in a good way. We were all into anything strange or weird, whether it be music, movies, culture, news, whatever. We played with the Ouija board all the time because a psychic told us that we shouldn't. We were good kids, but we were rebellious, and we always wanted to find things out for ourselves instead of taking what anyone else had to say at face value. We were sort of investigators of the world, at least in our mind. We never believed what we couldn't prove to ourselves. The thing is, when it comes to the Dogman, we accidentally proved to ourselves that it did and does, in fact, exist. And the Dogman was something that had never even been on our radar. We set out to see if one of our paranoid theories was true or false, involving possible occult symbolism used in a public experimental forest, but we ended up proving to ourselves at least that modern werewolves really do roam the woods of America. Well, at least the experimental woods of America. Let me explain what I mean. Off to the east of the Angelina State Forest is the Stephen F. Austin Experimental Forest. I've been reading online for years about that place, as I never understood back in the day, and still have some trouble comprehending what an experimental forest even is. It seems as though they experiment on the wildlife and the plants in there. They admit to having messed with giving fungus to trees, so when I was younger, my crazy friends and I used to wonder what other experiments they might have done on the animals in those woods that they might not have told anyone about. We used to half joke that we'd eventually run into some experimental monster animal in the experimental forest, and amazingly, that's exactly what eventually happened. At least, we ran into a beast that sure seemed unnatural to us. Now, this experimental forest also featured something called an interpretive trail. What does that mean? Can't tell you. We decided at the time that it meant they put some kind of secret into the trail that we were all supposed to interpret. We automatically jumped to the idea that this was some sort of occult symbolism or something of that nature. I think we got the idea from some cable show that was on back then, saying there were occult symbols in everything in the USA. So around 2016 or 2017, when one of us was looking at Google Maps, they noticed that the trail in the experimental forest seems to be actually laid out in the shape of a coffin. To teenagers like we were, a coffin is close enough to an occult symbol that we figured we were on the trail of some very large secret. You see, someone decided in 2015 to do a street view of each of the benches built alongside the trail, and when you view the map of his photos from overhead, you can clearly see the coffin shape that I'm referring to. Very spooky, huh? Note the blue dots on this map image. Each one of those blue spots represents another bench, and together I think they really do resemble a coffin shape. Naturally, we had spooky theories about why this should be, none of them based on anything but our own imaginations. Nevertheless, when you're looking for something to be spooky, you can convince yourself of anything. So, we decided we'd go and, quote, walk the coffin, unquote, as we named the concept of walking around and sitting on each bench in succession until you had succeeded in sitting on every bench, and thus walking the coffin. We each had our own well-thought-out opinions on what would happen if you were to actually walk the coffin. We were convinced that something had been built into the design of the park, and that by completing the circuit, maybe your third eye would be opened. Perhaps a secret hidden door would be revealed, so that you could witness wonders and mysteries, then get invited into a secret order reserved for the smartest people only. One of us felt that if you walked the coffin, you'd be able to have a conversation with a person who is no longer alive. But theories are for testing, so we often set out on our own to see if our ideas held any water. Each time any of us set out to walk the coffin, though, something seemed to happen to prevent us from finishing. One person claimed they twisted their ankle halfway through, but most of us were honest in that we just got creeped out and ran away. If you walk through the woods in general, you can hear sounds all around you, but if you walk in those woods, you can get paranoid and just want to go home. At least, it was that way for us, because we had hyped ourselves up so much about it. Only one of us had ever actually claimed that they had walked a complete coffin, and that was this guy I'll call Jeremy, because he looks a lot like that dude from The Quartering on YouTube. Our Jeremy said he walked the coffin, but nothing happened when he finished. That didn't stop him from believing in the whole thing, though. He just felt that he must have started or ended on the wrong bench. He would tell stories of hearing voices and vaguely making out nature beings off in the distance, and he was convinced there was a way to walk the ritual, which would work to open some portal, or at least a trap door or something. So, one time I corralled Jeremy and two of the girls, and we set out to spend the day walking the coffin. We figured we'd have time to do it twice or three times, so we wanted to start from a different bench each time. We were convinced that if we found the correct bench to start the circle with, and the correct one to end on, then we'd solve the puzzle. We actually hadn't even made it around one time when the sky started to get dark. I think we had 3 benches to go, and we were all wondering where the day went. Had we miscalculated the time that it would take to walk the trail? Or were we experiencing missing time in some way? After all, Jeremy told us it took him less than 3 hours to walk the coffin when he did it. Had he been lying to us the whole time? Or was something strange going on? I looked at Jeremy, and he looked as confused as I felt. When you're confused in the forest, you should go home. And even though we felt confused and should have backed out, we decided to press on and attempt to complete walking the coffin. Pressing onward, we came to the point on the coffin that would represent the upper right shoulder of the box if we were looking down on it. Just past the bench, there was a tiny little wooden bridge. It was just a platform over the quicksand-like mud. You could scarcely even call it a bridge at all. At any rate, when we got done sitting on the bench, we rose up to cross that little bridge and continue our full circuit. Only when we stood up, something ran, loudly, out of the woods, startling the girls and me in the process. Jeremy is the only one of us who stood his ground, as I think he was hoping to be about to meet a great occult master or something. It was nothing of the sort. It was a tall, gray, hairy man, with a head like a wolf. It was not as tall as the brown creature I would see with my girlfriend years later on Route 59, but it was taller than any of us. This creature looked 1,000 years old. It had seen better days, and yet it stood tall and strong, and could clearly tear any of us apart that it chose to. Although I assumed the brown dogman I told you about earlier was male, I knew for a fact that this one was, as I was viewing him from the front, and he had no clothing on, covering his privates. Also, he had thinner fur on his belly, and it was easier to see the gender. This creature also, like the brown one, had a head more like a wolf than anything else, but a sort of a prehistoric kind of a wolf, not a modern one. It had a crazy look in its eye, and it seemed to have run over to us for a bad reason. Jeremy shushed us all and said, "I think he has something to tell us." And so we quieted down. The creature sort of cleared its ancient throat and then let out a long, ear-piercing howl. In the middle of it, even Jeremy knew we were not going to be gaining any wisdom from this creature, and he told us we should scatter. Each of us ran in a different direction. The Dogman might catch one of us, but he wasn't going to catch all of us. So, Jeremy and I stay in touch to this day, but those two girls sort of didn't appreciate being left alone to run home from some kind of dinosaur wolf monster. I can't really list them as my friends any longer. I feel bad about the way things went down, but I still think that splitting up was the best thing to do. Jeremy claimed the wolf followed him most of the way out of the forest, but I don't know how much I believe Jeremy's stories anymore. A few of us still debate whether the creature we saw was natural, supernatural, or possibly the result of some experiment in that experimental forest, which may have gone terribly wrong. I got the impression that the Wolfman was sent to prevent us from crossing over that wooden bridge, and if that was its aim, then it was successful. I'm not saying I'd never walk the coffin again, but I think I'd only be willing to do it if we could gather a really well-trained team. We'd need multiple camera personnel. We'd need at least one drone with permission to fly overhead. We'd have to approach it in a more thorough manner. It's not something I'd attempt again on a lark, and I'd advise you to be cautious as well. Just use the trail as a trail. Get some exercise, see some nature, but don't try to solve any occult riddles unless you are ready to suffer the consequences. Those are the lessons I learned after I met the experimental forest Dogman. Our executive producer is Mike Ortiz, with Mike as EP Life's a Breeze. He's a guy you want to please, our executive producer named Mike Ortiz. Please join us in welcoming our newest channel member, Mike Ortiz, and thanking him for making this episode possible. In exchange, Mike gets to see our weekly Sunday Secret Uncensored stories, all far too wild to ever run on this channel. You too can get this and other perks by joining our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Or you can accomplish the same thing by doing what Mike Ortiz did and clicking that join link under this or any of our videos to become a Scary Stories channel member. And now here's internationally famous TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman to fill in any details I may have left out. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.